Hey crew, before we get started today, I wanted to plead with you to please take our survey. Our parent company, Just Enough Trope, is starting an internet radio station, and we need your advice. We need your likes, your dislikes. Do you like me? Check yes or no on what you would be looking for out of your internet radio solution, up to and including I don't listen to internet radio. We need to know that as well. So please go to our survey. There's a link for it in the show notes. You can also find it on the EISTPOD Twitter feed. Just take it. It's less than 2 minutes. It's 10 questions. It's very easy. It gives us an idea of what you would be looking for in terms of what you listen to for podcasts, what you listen to for music as well. Popular music, old-timey music, new-timey music, whatever those kids are into. We want to hear what you're into, so let us know about that. Also, big news just today. CBS and Viacom finally did it. They're tying the knot, and everything should be wrapped up, this winter as far as the merger goes. We reported on this before. It hasn't been a thing for a while since, of course, the big news was Les Moonves out at CBS. So, yeah, now we're getting back into that. Sherry Redstone is promising $500 million in synergy savings. That means layoffs. But like I said, we will talk about all of that on our next supplemental show next week. So come back for news about that and news from the Trek world. Our show today, so fun. I talked with Liz and Anika of the Antimatter Pod about all kinds of stuff, but nominally we talked about the TNG episode Sarek. Yeah, it's 2 TNGs in a row, but come on, you like TNG? What are you going to do? So listen up to that. You can follow us, like I said, on Twitter or on Facebook, also at EISTPOD, Facebook group, patreon.com/EISTPod, all the usual stuff. Take the survey. Take it. Take that survey. Your captain commands you. And with that, let's get underway.
It's worked so far, but we're not out yet.
I want to know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I want to know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Pure energy.
Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, a.k.a. Caliban, and I'd be overjoyed to have my listeners, Vulcan or no, describe this podcast as satisfactory. I'm joined on this episode by Anika, Dane, and Liz Barr, the hosts of Antimatter Pod, a Star Trek podcast about fashion, feminism, subtext, and subspace. Anika and Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. Permission to come aboard granted. Today we'll be talking about Sarek, the 23rd episode of the 3rd season of Star Trek The Next Generation. Star Trek The Next Generation had its work cut out for it in the fall of 1987. Revive an esoteric yet underappreciated brand with a limited appeal while making it distinct from the original while producing an ambitious science fiction show on a limited budget and debuting to possible obscurity and ignominy in direct syndication. No problem. Make it so. But TNG, despite its early setbacks and its dogged determination to stand apart from the original series, would succeed and go on to eclipse in many ways the accomplishments of its forebear, thanks in no small part to the contributions of many original series key players, not the least of which was Gene Roddenberry himself, a man whose spark of inspiration in 1966 had been fanned into a flame of creativity by screenwriters, actors, and authors over the 2 decades since the show's debut, and a man who, like Sarek, would be forced to drop the reins of his creation and entrust the success and vision of Star Trek to future generations. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. First, Anika and Liz, I always ask new guests to the show about their backstories. How did you become Star Trek fans? Anika?
So my first experience with Star Trek was the original series episode Balance of Terror.
Okay.
which I saw as a 6 or 7-year-old child.
Yeah.
And it was live on stage.
Really?
Yes. My father was a theater professor, and one of his intrepid students decided that directing Star Trek would be his thesis. And so he did that. And my father was like, "This is weird. I'll bring my child." So I didn't know it was a television series until after that. I just really liked the whole crazy wackiness of it all. And then I found out it was a TV series, and at that time, by then it was 2 TV series, and so
right.
I started watching in the first season of Next Generation.
So this was like a full dramatization. Was it like was the stage divided? What was the staging for the Romulan ship and the Enterprise?
Yeah, so it was there was a scrim in front of the audience was actually sitting on the stage, so that we were looking down at them. It was cool, and they had a scrim in between the audience and the actors, and so they would like shut it off, go fade to black, and then it would come up and it would be the different ship.
Okay, all right, I can see that.
They also had like commercial breaks. They had 2 actors would come out in front of the scrim and do like they were like doing a coffee commercial, I believe.
Okay, sure, yeah. Or like Timex, or takes a lick and keeps on ticking.
It was really funny. But yeah, so and I was like, again, I was like 7, and I just really thought that it was cool. Like they had the pointy ears, and so I just really remember the pointy ears and being interested that there was like a good pointy ear and the bad pointy ear, and like that was what drew me in. And then eventually when I just started watching, I started watching the original series. It was like only on at like 10 or 11 at night. I had to convince my mother to let me stay up and watch this. And she was like, she tried to watch with me once, and it was the Galileo 7. And after like 15 minutes, she was like, "This is boring. Why do you want to watch this? Aren't you bored?" And I'm pretty sure I was bored, but I had to, I had too much pride to admit that I didn't actually enjoy that particular episode.
She didn't want to see giant paper mache spears come flying at our heroes?
No, she was just like, don't understand. But yeah. So that's my origin story.
That's certainly a unique one. Liz, what about you?
Mine is very commonplace. My mother had been a Trekkie as a child. She watched the original series with her dad. Her father was a very big science fiction fan. He died before I was born, but I feel like we have that in common. And when Next Generation came along, my parents were renting the videos, and so it was on around the house, and I resisted for a couple of years, and then I finally got sucked in. That's
an amazing story that it's sort of multi-generational like that. Many guests of a certain age do talk about how it was their parents that got them into it, that they were watching it, and so as a kid you sort of start watching it. But the fact that it was passed down like that is really neat.
Well, my mother was a child of the space program, and she was absolutely obsessed with space and science fiction. She wanted to be an astrophysicist, but a teacher told her that girls couldn't do maths. So my mother is not actually very good at maths, but that's because she's bad at maths, not because she's a woman.
Sure.
But she watched Star Trek and the original Battlestar Galactica with her father, and my father watched Doctor Who and the BBC children's science fiction of the 70s with his mother. So I got both sides.
Yeah, I guess so. And just following you on Twitter, I see that you are sort of doing the same thing yourself, going back, watching old Doctor Who episodes and whatnot. Oh, yeah. I got into Doctor Who. I watched it as a child, and then I became a big fan via the reboot from 2005. And I love classic Doctor Who. I think, obviously, much of it is terrible and it's so cheap, but stuff like Genesis of the Daleks I find scarier because it's clearly made with everyday objects lying around a TV studio. And in some ways, this terrible story of war and death is more compelling because of it. They used to run Doctor Who on public television here when I was a kid, and so it was always that weird thing where a white guy with a fro was running from robots with a scarf. And I didn't have any really connection to it until, the much maligned Fox movie in the 90s. Not being from a Commonwealth country, we just didn't have a really appreciation for it. But that's when I started to get into it, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I'm very fond of that TV movie. I think it tried really hard to bridge the gap between US and British television. And I think it did some cool things really, really well. And some other things, it tried.
Anika, on your blog, Manic Pixie Dust, you've got a section called Pixie Fashion where you provide an analysis of various characters' costumes from different sci-fi properties. How'd you get started doing that?
I've dressed up my whole life. It's been really, my passion since I was young. And I would dress up my pillows. I would try out outfits on my pillows and do, store display designs on my bed to decide, what I was going to wear. So it's just something that I fell into. I was a cosplayer. I am a cosplayer.
Sure.
But I don't actually have the skills to make really amazing actual replicas of the costumes. Padme Amidala is my favorite character, and her costumes were all high-end couture.
Yeah, right.
And I just don't have the skill set to even attempt to start to try to make that. And so I started doing something that I called ready-to-wear characters.
Okay.
Which was just sort of going into my closet or a Goodwill and seeing how I can reproduce the costume without sewing anything.
Yeah.
just putting it all together. And so in order to do that, I needed to really know the costumes. So I started paying more attention to what people wear. Entirely. And I was a theater major, and costuming was my technical, you had to take a technical side, and I took costuming, and I was terrible at the sewing and construction. You have no idea how bad I was at this. Yeah, I sewed things on completely backwards and crazy. But I enjoyed the design side of it and the paying attention to what people wear side. So I used those skills to look at the costumes and how they related to the story. And I realized, it's such an art. Obviously it's an art, but when you start paying attention, I did a review of the first Avengers movie, and I didn't mean it to become, just about the costumes, but I saw so much of the costuming, telling the story. You didn't even need to pay attention to what was being said. You could get the story just by paying attention to the costuming.
Interesting.
And, I just wrote that. And so I just started, the first fashion project, quote unquote, that I did was with Deanna Troi, because she wears so many non-uniform outfits, but is sort of
trying
to be they were her version of uniform. And I just thought that was so interesting. It was why did she make these choices?
Yeah.
So we went at it from character perspective as opposed to a technical perspective. I include in my, I research why the actual reasons are, and I include that in what I'm saying, but the reason I'm doing it is to say, why did the character choose this costume, not why did the actor or why did the creator or costume designer, why did the television series, but why did the character put this on, and what does it say?
Sure. I've always wanted to see an analysis of the admirals' costumes and the dress uniforms on Trek shows, because they're
so
always
many.
Changing, and they seem to be made with a lot less practicality. And admirals seem to be able to wear whatever they want. Admiral Satie just wears these amazing dresses, and that's fine.
She's retired. I think at that point.
She's retired.
True. Yeah, she's emeritus. Yeah, Liz, I saw that recently you've been compiling statistics on Twitter of the demographics of Star Trek tie-in novelists.
Oh,
and as someone who's had a lot of Trek novel writers on this show, I've been watching the results with interest. What were your general findings on that subject?
Well, it's really interesting how it's changed over the years. Back in the 70s, fully 40%, or maybe even more, Anyway, a considerable proportion of tie-in novelists for TOS in the 70s were women. And I think that's because so much Trek writing was happening in fanzines that women just had the practice. And then you had a lot of like big-name male writers doing tie-ins as well. But overall, it's about 30% across the board. But until you get to about 2005, roughly around the time John Ordover leaves Pocket Books, it suddenly drops really dramatically down to 16 or 18% women, and that's even with 100% of the Voyager books being done by Kirsten Beyer.
Right.
And it was just really shocking to me. I expected about 30%, which is the sort of number you get to that feels a bit equal. You know you could do better, but you're making that's sort of the default. And so the fact that the current numbers are so very low, it really shocked me. And out of curiosity, I just ran the numbers the other day on Star Wars tie-ins from 2014 after they ditched the extended universe. Star Wars averages about 30%, where I expected, but something really interesting there happens in 2017, where suddenly they move to 40% women, and a whole lot of the men coming into the line are men of colour. So it suddenly becomes much more diverse. And I actually think that if I excluded the Choose Your Own Adventure books for younger readers, it would be more like 50% women. And then I looked at Star Trek in the same period, 2017 to 2019, and that was 80% men.
Una McCormick, basically, and that's about it.
And Kirsten Beyer when she has time. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and she's got a Voyager novel coming out soon.
Yeah, I think it's been put back because she's so busy with Discovery and Picard.
Yeah.
And it's just a real shame to me because I think tie-ins can be such a useful jumping off point for casual fans into science fiction, for younger readers into adult fiction, and just voices have been lost and I don't think they're being replaced.
Yeah, and keeping a character like Sarek alive, in the interregnum between TOS and TNG as well, and other characters. Well, I look forward to your continuing reportage on that topic.
I'm going to spend a few weeks trying to figure out sort of the behind-the-scenes stuff and how the industry works and see if I can draw any conclusions from that. And, a blog post will come eventually. And after that, Simon & Schuster will never, ever want to hear me or publish anything I write.
Possibly. We'll see.
It's not the way to endear yourself, but chances were slim in that direction anyway, so...
Well, good luck on that.
Thank you.
Well, the two of you, with your powers combined, form the podcast Antimatter Pod. I know you've both been fans and you've written media criticism for a while, but how did it evolve into a podcast?
So we have this Discord it's called the Admiral's Legion, and it's for Katrina Cornwell fans. Anika started it with another friend of ours, Rika, and we just got talking about podcasts in general, and I think Anika has been talking about wanting to do one for a while.
Yes, I have. I've wanted to do one, but I had trouble finding a partner, I'm constantly bringing it up and saying I'd really like to have a podcast, but I can't do it by myself. And it was just sort of daunting to people. Either they already had their own, or they
everyone has one.
They're like, maybe I could guest, but I don't want to commit to something. So,
sure.
But Liz was game. She just jumped in and was like, "Well, I'm into it. I don't know how to use these things, but I'm going to go find out." And I was like, okay, I'm going to go buy a microphone. Then we're going to do it.
I literally had a microphone.
It's kind of amazing.
I had a microphone sitting around because a few years ago, another friend of mine and I were going to do a podcast about boarding school fiction and girls' boarding school novels. And I just went out and bought a secondhand Snowball, and it was great, but I never got to use it. So when Anika said this and I realised she was serious, I was like, this is my time. I'm going to figure out how to do this. And a friend of mine luckily produces an award-winning podcast, Book Who's Talking, and so I hit her up over brunch for tips, and off we went.
That's amazing. Now, let's roll it back a little bit. Boarding school fiction? I can't even think of any examples of. It's like a St. Trinian's or something like that.
That's very Australian.
Yeah, this is a Commonwealth thing.
Okay, all right. Well, I can't wait for Fox to make a movie about that so I can get into it.
One day. One day.
Why did you guys choose this specific episode, Sarek, to discuss today?
Well, sort of like the secret unknown tagline of our podcast is not a Sarek podcast because we constantly talk about Sarek.
Okay, all right.
We have a lot of feelings and thoughts on our Vulcan dad.
I think, the overall content of season 2 of Discovery really helped. Gave us a lot to talk
certainly.
about in that direction.
Well, I mean, yeah, you guys are spoiled for choice as far as having Sarek things to see in season 2 of Discovery.
We really like, well, I certainly really like him as a character, but I also like to make fun of him.
Okay, all right. Hold on to that instinct, and we'll just get right into it then. We are talking about the TNG episode Sarek, the 23rd episode of the 3rd season of TNG. It first aired May 14th of 1990. The teleplay for the episode is by Peter S. Beagle. This is Beagle's only script for the Trek franchise, but he's best known for writing the acclaimed fantasy novel The Last Unicorn in 1968, and he also wrote the screenplay for the 1982 film version by Rankin and Bass. He also wrote the screenplay for the 1978 animated version of The Lord of the Rings, directed by Ralph Bakshi. The story is by Siegel, but it's also from an unpublished story by Mark Cushman and Jake Jacobs. Cushman is the co-writer, along with Susan Osborne, of the Trek reference book series These Are the Voyages, covering 3 seasons of the original series. Jacobs is an actor and a screenwriter, and along with Cushman, wrote episodes of the television series Bachelor Pad and Channel K. Haven't seen either of those. I should mention as well that the script received an uncredited page 1 rewrite by Ira Stephen Bear and Ronald D. Moore, as Moore pointed out in an AOL chat in 1997. The episode was directed by Les Landau, who we've spoken about many, many times on this show. He's directed for every post-TOS, pre-Discovery series, and has 2 characters, Dr. Landau and Admiral Landau, named in his honor in TNG. The stardate for the episode is 43917.4, and your assignment, Antimatter Pod crew, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of Sarek.
Turns out Sarek is the worst.
Oh, that's a little harsh.
It's not his fault this time.
I think it's more Vulcan emotions take over the ship. Captain Picard steps in.
Yeah. Your version's better.
If we plug those 2 together, I think we get pretty close to 25. So here's some interesting facts from our memory banks about this episode. Showrunner Michael Piller and screenwriter Cushman have both talked about the genesis of this episode. The details seem to be a little fluid, but they mostly compare. The gist seems to be that the idea was they wanted to pitch that a high-ranking member of Starfleet or the Federation would be facing the problem of senescence and an analog of senility. Cushman remembers that Roddenberry initially asked him to write 2 versions of the script, one featuring the character of Sarek and a second focusing on a different original Vulcan character. In the early years of TNG, there was a reluctance by Roddenberry and the production staff to make too many connections to the original series, but as TNG had reached its 3rd year, it was decided that it would be appropriate to use the character of Sarek. But that said, it was an open season on TOS references, and Ira Stephen Bear noted that even mentioning Spock specifically in this episode was debated heavily by the writing staff. Bear maintained that his push to reference Spock was one of the major dominoes that led to the interconnectedness of our current Star Trek franchise. Yeah, actually, it's weird to think that at the time they wanted nothing really to do with TOS, and now everything is connected. There's tie-in novels, there's a prequel series, and films and everything.
It's amazing.
I guess you have Ira Stephen Bear to thank for that, in his own words.
Among many things.
Yeah,
he's done a lot.
Michael Piller himself noted the resonance between Sarek in the episode and the real-life circumstances of Gene Roddenberry. As quoted in the reference book, The Continuing Mission, Piller said, quote, "He was this great man going into decline, and I immediately felt a very strong connection to the premise of Sarek, because I could see that it really was about the universe that we lived in on a daily basis," end quote. Director Les Landau was very effusive in his praise for this episode, saying specifically of Patrick Stewart's performance, quote, "If you watch what Patrick did in that scene, it's truly spectacular. I've had many great experiences on the show, but certainly that was one of the best," end quote. It's even more impressive to note that the majority of the scene of Picard's breakdown was captured in one take.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little more in a little bit. Whether or not references to the original series are a good idea, there's still quite a few in this episode. The planet Corridon, which was the subject of Journey to Babel, Sarek's first appearance is mentioned. Sarek introduces Perrin as She Who Is My Wife, which how he introduces Amanda in Journey to Babel. Additionally, the scene where Picard succumbs to the intense emotions of Sarek mirrors a similar scene from The Naked Time, where Spock is struggling to contain his emotions under the effect of the Psi 2000 virus. That scene was also captured in one take, though there was a factor of limited production time involved for that scene in that episode. This is also the first time a mind meld is seen on TNG. It's also the first appearance of Joyce Robinson as Ensign Gates. She would appear as a helmsman in a mostly non-speaking role for an additional 35 episodes on the series.
Nice.
And speaking of actors, let's talk about guest stars on this episode. William Dennis appears as Key Mendrozin. Dennis appeared in several guest roles on TV shows in the late 80s and early 90s. He also holds a PhD in theoretical chemistry. So I guess my parents were right. I shouldn't have switched to theater. I could have finished my med degree and then just gone into acting anyway. But my mistake. His last screen credit and his only feature film credit is the 1995 movie Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. Rocco Sisto appears in the episode as Sakath. This is Sisto's only Trek credit. He graduated from the Tisch School of Arts in 1977 and appeared in many TV shows and films throughout his career, appearing most recently in 2017 on the CBS series Madam Secretary. He was actually born in Italy, and he played the young version of Junior Soprano on the HBO series.
Huh.
And Joanna Miles plays Perrin in the episode, a role that she would reprise in the 5th season episode Unification Part 1. Miles studied at the Actors Studio and went on to a career in TV and films spanning 5 decades. She won 2 Emmy Awards for her portrayal of Laura Wingfield in the 1973 film version of The Glass Menagerie.
Wow.
And Anika, as somebody who was a theater major, studied theater, you must have taken the stage at some point in your life.
Yes.
Did you ever, were you ever in or working behind the scenes on Glass Menagerie?
No, but I definitely did scenes for various classes. That is a well used.
I've never done Glass Menagerie, but I definitely have a Tom monologue or two in my bag when I was auditioning. And last but most, this episode, of course, features Mark Lenard as Ambassador Sarek. Lenard's first role in the Trek franchise was as the Romulan commander in the first season TOS episode Balance of Terror, as Anika knows. He would also appear as Klingon captain in the first scene of 1979's Star Trek The Motion Picture, making him the first actor in the Trek franchise to portray a Vulcan, a Romulan, and a Klingon. He first appeared as Sarek in the second season TOS episode Journey to Babel, a role that he would reprise in the animated series episode Yesteryear, which we've covered on this podcast. 3 feature films, of course this episode, and the 5th season episode of TNG Unification Part 1, in which Sarek succumbs to Bandai syndrome. And you guys have mentioned that your podcast is not a Sarek podcast. What is it about Sarek that you enjoy so much? If you could put it in words.
I really love stories about relationships between parents and their adult children and the push and pull of that tension and that love. And so they gave me Sarek and Spock. And this was my first, as a kid, this was my first introduction to Sarek, and I had never seen Spock. So I found him incredibly interesting, and my parents said he was very important. And I was like, yeah, okay, you talk about this other series, I guess. But
right.
I found Mark Lenard's performance so compelling that for the first time I wanted to go back and watch the original series.
So I find all Vulcans really fascinating.
Even Sybok?
Yes, definitely Sybok. Are you kidding?
He's amazing.
Just checking.
But and I respect their culture, but I disagree with 90% of what they believe.
Sure.
In terms of how to deal with your emotions.
Yeah.
And I say that I really love Vulcans, but I would be a terrible one, and I'd probably be a better Romulan.
I can see that.
But I think that Sarek is the most interesting in many ways because he is so very Vulcan and so very determined to be Vulcan, but he also loves humans. Like he is just. especially when you see him in Discovery, he's just he's younger and a little bit more like, oh, I'm just going to collect all the humans and I'm going to, I'm going to figure out how to fix them and everything is going to be great and I'm going to befriend everybody and spread my Vulcan wisdom as far and wide as possible.
Yeah.
And but he's like terrible. He's terrible as a person. And so, he's the last person who should be in charge of spreading wisdom across the galaxy.
Right.
But he thinks that that's his number one position, and he does it from a place of absolute belief. And love. He wants to make the universe better. He just is completely wrong about how to go about it.
Right.
I don't think he's entirely wrong. You consider his regard for the original Georgiou and the friendship that he obviously has with Cornwell. He's not a totally terrible person. It's just that as a parent and as a mentor, he fails.
I think that I think we've said this, that if you look at all of Vulcan, he's the best friend to humans. He's the most willing to accept their emotional stuff. Their humanity, I guess, is the word for it.
Yeah.
He's the most willing to compromise between Vulcan stoicism and human emotionality, but the Vulcans don't like him for that. He's considered weird by Vulcan standards because he has this thing where he thinks the humans can be better, and the other Vulcans are like, we're just going to tell them what to do, and then if they just listen, then everything will be fine. Whereas Sarek's like, I'm going to teach you.
He's almost he's like this is maybe too lofty, but he's a sort of Promethean character in that way, in that he comes from this very elevated culture of the Vulcans. And of course the Vulcans and the humans don't really get along, as we see in Enterprise, but he's that guy who's like, let's give him a chance. I'm not sure if he decided that before or after he married a human woman twice, but he definitely is on humanity's side.
I think he definitely had to decide it beforehand. Because
I don't think
he has a crush on humanity, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there you go. Well, Mark Lenard as an actor was somebody who I felt never really got his due. He got his start in acting while serving in Europe in World War II. He was actually cast in an army production of Volpone that toured Europe. And at the end of the war, he received his master's degree in theater, and he made his way to Broadway to debut in 1957. Then he moved into TV in 1959 and continued to play in soaps and TV films produced on the East Coast until he moved to Hollywood in 1965, making his feature debut in the biblical epic The Greatest Story Ever Told. Then, of course, he appeared in Balance of Terror in 1966, and he continued to make TV appearances throughout the 60s and 70s on shows like Mission Impossible, The Wild Wild West, It Takes a Thief, and he was a regular on the late 60s Western show Here Comes the Brides. He also played the role of General Urko in the TV version of Planet of the Apes. He had a guest role in a 2-part episode of Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, and he had a small role in the 1977 Woody Allen film Annie Hall, which I did not remember. I'm going to have to watch that again and look for him. He was also a voice actor. He lent his voice to advertisements for Saab, Zenith watches, and did narration on PBS, the Learning Channel, and the Discovery Channel. And of course, he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma in 1995 and died in 1996 at the age of 72, survived by his wife of 36 years, Anne, and their 2 daughters, Roberta and Catherine.
I think that was the first Star Trek death that I was really aware of, and I was so sad.
Yeah. I remember vaguely when Roddenberry died, and people being sad but not really connecting for me, mostly because I was, TNG was in full bloom at that point, and so the show was still going, so apparently it didn't matter that much to my undeveloped mind.
I remember that Jim Henson died the same week, or very close, and that overshadowed Roddenberry for me, because I had more of a connection to Muppets.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
But I think that I do really, really remember, that was again, a week or 2 week period and was like, wow, this is really sad. Like, why are these, and people of my childhood, it's like, it was still my childhood, but I was ridiculous. And so people of my childhood, responsible for my childhood, are dying. What's going on? So.
I rewatched this episode a couple times in preparation for this show, and it features amazing performances. It's got the return of a classic character, but I couldn't help but being kind of depressed by it. I mean, I felt like when it was over, I couldn't really parse what it was trying to say to the audience. Like, okay, yeah, getting old sucks. We're all going to get old. But I couldn't believe that was it. And I'm ashamed to say it wasn't until I started reading some commentaries on it and looking at some of the scholarship about the episode that I learned, oh, it's about Gene Roddenberry. He's Sarek in the episode.
Yeah.
Now I understand.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's so interesting that he had a part in how this episode was written when he must have been aware of his own decline, and I understand he had had many strokes by this point and was taking a back seat on production. And I wonder if, in suggesting that it be about Sarek, he was intentionally positioning this as a farewell to himself, which I didn't mean to sound so self-serving. I think it's actually a really lovely gesture.
Sure.
I think that part of what Sarek is doing in the episode is trying to control his own legacy. Like, he has been working on this one thing for 93 years, and so if he can just complete it, then he can say, I have accomplished this, and it won't, failing to accomplish it won't overshadow all the accomplishments he has already done. So it's ending on his terms. And I can see a creator also wanting to sort of end on my terms, bring back a legacy character in order to say, this is what Star Trek is, and this is why I made it.
I was reading remarks from Michael Piller, someone else who helped shape the Star Trek universe and was taken from us too soon. And he was talking about the uncomfortable parallels in constructing the episode, and basically the same thing that you were saying, having a creator who is trying to finish this work, but also at the same time seeing his faculties and his sort of self-control disappear. Not only is Sarek trying to land this deal that's taken so long, but he's also seeing everything that he's relied on, his emotional control and just his view of the world, sort of slip away from him.
Yeah, it made me think of the later Discworld novels after Terry Pratchett's Alzheimer's was becoming apparent and impacting his work. And yeah, I think there are lots and lots of parallels we can draw. And I think it's a very real situation. And I think that's what TNG, when TNG is at its best, this is what it does. It takes something very real and personal and gives it to an alien. And we can still see the humanity of that story.
That's a great comparison. I think the bright side of this situation, losing Roddenberry, is that with him stepping away from the production, a lot of the people who were, quote unquote, his people were also departed as well, like embattled showrunner Maury Hurley. So you see a new generation, so to speak, take the helm, and the show and the franchise really take off like never before. So I don't know if that makes Michael Piller Picard, similar hair, I guess. And maybe that makes Maurice Hurley Keeman Drozen or somebody. Iron Steven Bear is Data, just to continue this. And that means Melinda Snodgrass is Geordi, maybe? I don't know. It's not a perfect one-to-one.
No. It's interesting that you compare Piller to Roddenberry in this, because I've been watching season 2 of Voyager, which is his last on Star Trek.
Right.
And he was obviously very exhausted and creatively burnt out and full of ideas for changing and updating the format of the series, but not quite able to stick the landings. And so, knowing when it's time to step back and let the new generation take over is such a difficult skill to learn.
Yeah, I think that is something that plagued the later years of this period of the franchise. I can imagine taking something, like I mentioned in the intro, that was a real gamble, like, can we do this? Having it be so successful, and then, like Sarek, thinking, well, we brought it here. Whichever producer or writer I am, have made it this thing. I can't give it to somebody else. I'm just going to have to stick around.
I think that happens with all showrunners. They come in and they're new and they're welcomed, and then they get tired. And it's so hard to... It seems like the entertainment industry has trouble with succession planning for showrunners on big franchises.
Yeah. And his name rhymes with Schmannen Schmaga.
I was going to say Schmick Schmerman, but yes.
Oh, well,
both these things are true.
Well, I'm going to plant my flag here, I think, and say that I think TNG Season 3 might be the show's best season. There's better individual episodes. There are hours that give particular characters better moments in development. But this is just solid Star Trek over the course of pretty much the entire season. There's a few all-time classic episodes. I think the third season is where the maturity of the show really begins to emerge.
I agree.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think it's where, the characters have settled into themselves, the writers are confident telling different types of stories, and even the aliens of the week stories are really, really strong.
I noted that I think I read on Memory Alpha that this is a season of kidnappings. I think there's like 8 separate characters who are all kidnapped or beamed away or restrained by somebody else. So I'm not sure what that means.
That's on Worf.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Get up off your butt.
You know what? One of my notes on this episode is Worf is bad at his job.
He does hold 2 men apart just with his hands, like during that bar fight.
Yeah, but he didn't notice that there was a problem to begin with.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah.
Beverly, Deanna, and Will are all like, something's wrong here. And Worf's like, I haven't noticed. Like, that's literally his line.
Maybe,
I haven't noticed.
Maybe because he's a Klingon, this constant low-level hostility. He's like, finally everyone's being normal. Thank you. This is what I'm used to in Russia.
Yeah, right, yeah. There's no actual blood on the wall, so how bad can it be?
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Right. There's a few episodes that aren't so good in this season. I love that Sarek comes right after The Most Toys, which is another Stone Cold classic, and then it's immediately followed by Menage a Trois, Womp Womp.
Yeah.
But great fashion.
But it's that sort of thing where, and you see this a lot in network TV, but I think really in a lot of TNG, that idea of having the back 9 of the season, like the episodes that are not necessarily planned to be a part of the initial first part of the season. And I think that's where they kind of put either the bad ones or the ones that they are taking chances on. And so you get things like The Inner Light was one of those,
Yes.
And I think this is an example of one that maybe they weren't sure about. Maybe it took a little bit more to put it together, but was definitely worth what they ended up with.
I was struck watching it yesterday how simple Sarek is as an episode.
Yeah.
The stakes, we don't really have a sense
There's
of
not
the
really
stakes.
like a B story or anything.
No.
It's all A story.
No.
Like there's little vignettes of other plots like Geordi and Wes's date. Like Wes's date is this weird subplot.
Yeah.
But it's not like, we never actually even see the girl. So it's not like it's an important plot line. It's not a B story. It's just this extra subplot to A.
And I have to say,
and why,
Geordi and
why
Wesley,
cast somebody?
Yeah, Geordi and Wesley talking about women is so uncomfortable.
Oh boy, yeah.
Why do they let that happen?
Can you imagine what their reputation is? That they are both sort of weirdly half self-aware and half oblivious.
I assume that the women of
that's a great
Enterprise-
description.
There's probably like a secret group chat where the women of the Enterprise are like, Geordi asked me out, and someone else is like, yeah, Wesley has been staring at me, and I think he's trying to work up the courage. Can we workshop ways to let him down easy?
The dating pool is getting smaller and smaller here on the USS Enterprise.
Also, what kind of ensign dates a 17-year-old?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out how old he's supposed to be at this point. Like, he's probably 16 or 17, right?
I would have said 17.
He's a year or two out of the academy.
I feel like he started at 14, right?
Yeah.
And this is season 3.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a little weird, and Geordi's comments on such are a little weird. I'm trying to remember the episode where Geordi gets like his mental upgrade? I can't remember exactly what it is, but up to a certain point, he's like striking out with Christy and the Coco No-Nos, and then at some point, I can't remember the plot, but he gets like a thing, and then he's like, well, I'm more confident now.
I think it's a Barclay episode, isn't it? But yes.
The Barclay one?
I think so, but I
do remember him getting his upgrade.
Yeah.
And then like something happens to him and then it's not taken away.
Right, yeah.
So in theory, he is now confident forever. But does he really improve?
Yeah, well, he does rightfully get taken down for his holodeck exploits. In a season of holodeck exploits, because this is Booby Traps and Hollow Pursuits is this season.
Wesley references Geordi falling in love with the hologram, so it's what is the scuttlebutt on this? How many people know?
Everyone.
And why are we not creeped out? Why?
Well, I think the women of the ship are creeped out.
In some kind of training or
Well, you have to imagine that the holodeck is used for that purpose. Is Geordi not using it correctly for that purpose somehow?
He needs to get tips from Riker.
Yeah. Do whatever you want, but just no named characters here. No real people.
Yeah.
Historical's okay. If you want to go on a date with Eleanor Roosevelt, that's fine.
And who wouldn't? My new OTP is Geordi LaForge and Eleanor Roosevelt. But the thing, what bugs me is that Geordi, when he's not being creepy around women, is such a fun, decent character. And I really hate that he's given these issues with women when it doesn't really fit his personality otherwise. It just... And then you have LeVar Burton, who is such a decent person and so good looking. And it just feels like they're doing him a disservice. They've put this thing over his face so you can't see his eyes and given him a personality that is basically creepy. Why would you do that to your most high-profile actor at the time the series starts?
And not let him grow a beard. Are you a pro-Geordi beard or anti-Geordi beard?
I don't really have strong feelings. I don't think we saw enough of the beard for me to form an opinion.
I don't know. I think it would make him more creepy.
I don't know. Is it a neck beard or is it a goatee?
As an aesthetic.
Not the best.
I know that they're trying to be awkward, but he is not socially awkward. He is creepy.
That's the thing. He is very at ease with other social situations.
But yeah, you bring up romance or dating, and he almost drowns Wesley in that hot tub.
Well, Beverly hits him. It's a rough week for Wesley.
Yeah, it is true.
Can I just say that the fact that the hot tub is rainbow colored is really amazing.
I know, it's full of Kool-Aid or something. Yeah,
the rainbow slime pit. I want to know more about these aliens.
I do too.
They live in a rainbow slime pit. What do they look like?
It's clear that it's a money-saving episode, so we're never going to see them. But I did want a little more concession to their strangeness. Once Sarek is all fixed up and he's going to go negotiate this final thing, have him just come out of the room, just covered in red slime, and he's like, "It went great,
Thumbs
mission
up.
accomplished."
I kind of wish that this had been the episode that introduced the Cardassians, because as much as I love the weirdness implied. The implicit weirdness of the Lagarans, I think the stakes would have been much higher if this was, the treaty to officially end the war with Cardassia, and then it has these long-term effects of the Marquis and everything else afterwards. And if that's something that Sarek had a hand in, that almost, it's a terrible legacy, but I like the idea of him having played a part to shape the future of the Federation.
You just want to make Sarek even more the worst.
No, I just think that the emotional impact of this episode would have been even greater if we had seen the long-term impact of the treaty that Sarek negotiated.
I do agree that if it wasn't a one-off alien that we never even see, as you say, it would have more impact. Especially when you consider that this is his last, so this is going to be the last bit in in the history books for him.
Officially, yes, so but my headcanon is that he had
his legacy sentence.
Yes. I do headcanon that he had a part in the negotiation of the treaty with Cardassia and maybe gave away too much. It's a very bad treaty.
Because of Bendai syndrome?
Because of the... yeah, right.
Picard was busy that week.
Yeah, right. We couldn't use him for that. We did. I mean, it took 25 years for them to sort of tell us what happened with the Corridan negotiations after Journey to Babel.
True.
So maybe in the Picard series, we'll get the answer to what happened with these guys.
They probably finally have the budget to do justice to the slime-living Ligarans.
Yeah. All right, you hear that? Bring the Ligarans in for sure.
Yeah. That's my new ultimatum. If they don't bring back the Ligarans, I will stop watching.
Well, despite us not seeing the Ligarans, I'm sure they saved some money on this episode, and it's just like, there's what I think is interesting is that the strength of this episode and the faith that the production had in it to make it basically a radio play. I mean, it's 45 minutes of talking, punctuated by a brawl in 10 forward, and then a couple scenes with the hot tub with Kool-Aid. And it all rests on the performances of the leads and the focus on this storied character in crisis, which is amazing. The entire fourth act is basically just Picard and Sarek. It's that scene between them where he finally confronts him. Yes,
it's extraordinary. And you said that it could be a radio play. I was actually drawing on my iPad as I watched it yesterday and only occasionally looking up at the TV. And I've seen this episode a lot, so I know what's happening on screen. But
yeah,
it's just so vivid without the visuals.
I will say, though, there is the one scene in the middle, the concert, that is entirely nonverbal. Yes. There's just...
Yes.
And all of the movement on the screen is timed exactly to the music, and I just think that's so beautiful. I really appreciate the direction of this scene and how the whole story is told just through the different expressions on Sarek and Saketh and Deanna and Picard, and they tell the story as the the melody is playing, and it's really beautiful. So that could be part of the...
Yes. Perrin plays a big part in that scene too, and I think she's overshadowed as a character by Amanda, who we know so much more about. But I find Perrin really interesting because here is this woman another human woman who has married a Vulcan and who has apparently embraced many things about the Vulcan way of life. And she's also, his second wife after his famous first wife, and the stepmother to Spock, who we learn in Unification she doesn't necessarily like. I just think her story must be so fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the apparent shifting of the Vulcan culture from being a matriarchal society that we see in Amok Time to this is the woman who is my wife, Mrs. Sarek.
Yeah, and... It's just, I think that's partly an effect of having so many different writers on TOS and not necessarily talking to each other, and DC Fontana just sort of pulling all the strings together behind the scenes.
Yeah, right.
And I think, Vulcans are very complicated and they have millions of years of history. And so, they have remnants of the times that they were matriarchal. They have remnants of the times that they would get naked and rub each other with oil and call that a party. They've got a lot going on.
And they all, in Enterprise, we are introduced to young T'Pau, and she's sort of like a rebel. So it's I kind of like the idea that T'Pau took power. It was like, I'm in charge now, guys.
Yeah, the Kishara changed a lot of things up for Vulcan society, but it gave him a chance to sort of play around in the early years, though. The one thing that I have to say about that concert scene, which is great, and of course it wouldn't be TNG if there wasn't a spontaneous string quartet showing up, but
so TNG.
Yeah, when we get that shot of the tear, though, did that seem kind of fake to anybody else? I think they used a still of Mark Lenard's face, and then they animated or superimposed a tear going down. I mean, maybe they couldn't get it on the day. Patrick Stewart, though, has those perfect dual tears in his scene. When he is experiencing all those emotions, and it's all the more incredible when it was done in one shot.
I didn't realize that, but that just blows me away even more. And maybe Mark Lenard can't cry on cue, and that's why he's so good at playing Vulcan.
He did. He had a lot of makeup on too, so maybe they were worried that it would run or something like that. It's the perils of HD. Another HD thing that I caught in this episode is something is wrong with Jonathan Frakes' finger. If you look at the index finger on his right hand in this episode, he has like a flesh-colored like ace bandage on it for the entire episode, and then he is in all of his scenes, like sitting down and then kind of like, they don't have any pockets in their uniforms, but like he's sort of putting his hand behind him, or he's sort of dropping his right shoulder down. And all my research, I couldn't find out what happened to Jonathan Frakes' finger that week.
Do you think if we tweeted him and asked, he'd remember?
I don't know. I plan on asking him if I meet him sometime soon.
Yeah. So did you injure your finger in 1990?
Yeah. Were you mountain biking or something like that? Comes right back to it.
I will admit to being distracted in the concert scene by the clothing on the extras. They were mostly uniforms. But there were some civvy.
Yeah,
there was these two guys that I was like, they went down to like the Gap and bought these clothes and put them on them. These are not 24th century clothes. These are 1990, like peak 90s Gap clothes.
Yeah, the sharp lapel. Yeah, it was like structure, probably.
It was just and it was distracting. I was like, just throw some crazy, cloak on them or something. Do something to make this look slightly less like it is what it is.
You and your pleated slacks.
Maybe they're the caterers and they're just like, we need more people. Sit down.
Right, yeah. Put that duct tape down and get up here.
Yeah.
Perrin has these like huge jewels on her headdress and her necklace. I'm sure they're paste, but they must have been like super heavy.
I have to think that Perrin foreshadowed Amidala's, the red royal gown in Phantom Menace, because there are certain similarities there.
There are definitely. I can see that.
Amidala is so elegant, though, whereas Perrin she's got a pretty sweet wimple. She's got like a space nun thing going on.
Yeah, it's cool. Like she's hiding her ears so people don't see that they're not pointy. Even though, honey, you're a redhead. They're going to notice that you're not Vulcan.
And you don't have a bowl cut, yeah.
I was just, having just recently seen Journey to Babel and Amanda's clothes, I was sort of disappointed in Perrin's, I have to say. She's very Vulcan. She's like wearing basically the same outfit as Sarek is, just in hot pink because she's a girl, I guess.
Lady.
And so she has to be in hot pink. But other than that, it was really like the hot pink with the turquoise and the sort of yellow gold. I was like, she kind of looks like a My Little Pony, where like got this really, I like it, but it's very, I'm putting on my Vulcan clothes, and the only thing that I'm giving to my humanity is this color. Whereas Amanda's clothes were just ridiculous. And she was just like, maybe that's what Vulcans wear, but I'm going to guess that they do not go around wearing feather boas. Like, it's just not a thing on Vulcan.
I like that difference, though, because I think it highlights the difference between Perrin and Amanda's personalities, where, Amanda seems like a character who enjoys fashion for the sake of it and loves playing with colour and texture, and she's the wife of the Vulcan ambassador and she can turn up wearing whatever she wants. She can wear her opera gloves to the beach and no one can stop her. Whereas Perrin is much more embracing. Yeah, she's embracing a Vulcan culture. She is older than Amanda when we see her first, and married to a much older man. And I think she has a different perspective on Vulcans.
Perrin's ears get cold easy, so.
Yeah. Also, she hasn't raised a half Vulcan child, which I think would change her attitude considerably.
Patrick Stewart gets a lot of praise for his work in this episode, deservedly so. I think his scenes are a little more YouTubeable than Mark Lenard's, but I think Mark Lenard's are right up there with him. I mean, that scene where Picard confronts him, and he basically says, okay, look, I'm Mr. Logic Man, give me your argument, and then Picard does, and he's fighting him and himself the entire way through is just enthralling.
And logic!
And we need to see Mark Lenard's performance in that scene in order to see it in Picard's scene later. Like, it has to be Sarek's emotions and not Picard's emotions that Patrick Stewart is portraying. And so we need to see Sarek losing control in order to get the full impact of that. And I think that both of them do an amazing job at conveying that.
Picard has he's had a lot of crazy experiences over the course of his career, but this is the episode where we see him mind meld with Sarek, and I think we're led to understand that he will always carry a part of him, as you do when you mind meld with somebody. Then later on, he goes and lives an entire life as Kamen in the Inner Light. So there's like 3 or 4 people in him at this point. Like he's lived like hundreds of years of experience. So that's kind of like that's kind of cheating. But there is, of course, the Borg as well. Yeah.
Picard and identity is such an interesting issue that I don't think was necessarily explored much in the show. The trauma was discussed, but the idea that he has had all these experiences and all these memories hasn't really been taken up. And I kind of hope that's one of the things that Star Trek Picard addresses. Me too.
I'd have to assume that you guys are looking forward to and are excited about Star Trek Picard.
Yeah.
Other than seeing the effects of, the dings on his psyche of his long service, is there anything else you guys are looking for out of that show?
I really want new characters to fall in love with, and I want to see the next phase for the Federation. And I want to see the old characters that I already love, but I'm really here for the new people. And Seven.
I'm really excited for the Borg stuff and how it will relate to identity questions, because that's something I'm hugely interested in. And also, like, I can tell already that this is going to be a team is family show, and I love that. So I'm 100% ready to watch this team become a family as we go through whatever horrible probably things they have to deal with.
I'm looking forward to Picard's old family, these seasoned professionals who were chosen for the Enterprise D because they were the best of the best, come face to face with his new ragged group of misfits and weirdos.
Well, as we come to the end here, is there anything that we missed? Anything that you guys have left unsaid about this episode?
I have a very important question.
Yeah.
Yes.
You want me to go first? Okay. I have
Please, because yours might be one of mine.
Very important question for both of you. Do you think that Perrin and Picard were flirty? Because I have felt that there was some kind of little weird spark between them, like literally since I saw this episode in the 90s. And it's always been in the back of my head Picard definitely had a thing for Sarek's wife.
I think it's one of those things
she played along. It's like,
but is that...
Go watch Unification.
That she is attracted to him, or is that she is a lady who is being polite? Because I think Picard is definitely drawn to Perrin, and if she wasn't married, would be like, hey, you want to get dinner and listen to a string quartet? But I don't know that Perrin necessarily reciprocates.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
The real question is, do you see shades of that when they see each other again in Unification?
I remember.
Yes, definitely.
I definitely remember it being like, oh, they're at it again, though. Like,
okay.
There was just, again, in my head, it was just, there was something really, really there. Just, nothing untoward.
Nothing improper, yeah.
They're on the same wavelength. And I sort of get that. I can see that someone who marries a Vulcan and someone who is one of the more restrained characters in the show, but who loves old stuff and adventure, I can see how they would gel.
And she's a redhead with cheekbones, so she's his type.
Yes. I'm wondering if, I'm trying to think of what the first episode is that we really see Picard begin to come into his own as, a romantic lead himself. We do get Captain's Holiday this season. There's a little kissy face, in holodeck episodes and stuff, but maybe this is the first season where we start to see that side of Picard more.
Yeah, he's allowed to sort of let it out a little. That happened with Janeway too. It took a few years before she was allowed to be flirty in any way.
He had chemistry with Captain Lavoie, but she was the ex he was angry with or still resented. So
Right. Right.
But also cheekbones.
Yep, redhead with cheekbones.
Redhead with cheekbones.
Nailed it.
Yes.
My questions from this episode, one is, who do we think the son whose wedding Picard attended was?
Oh, boy. Well, I think there is a novel by somebody, maybe...
Yeah, I've read it.
Oh, you have? Okay, yeah, where he...
I don't remember the
it's
author.
Sarek.
But yeah, he marries Sarek.
Yeah.
Speaking of creepy...
Okay.
Uh-oh.
I mean, I kind of can see it, but it's a bit weird. I know they had sex and all, but there were circumstances.
There were pressing, urgent circumstances. God, I would love to headcanon that it's Sybok. And then I'm trying to think of, who Sybok was marrying. Who would he marry?
Caitlin Dar.
Some happy cult member?
Yeah, it didn't say one person. He could be marrying a whole group of people. Yeah, it could have been a mass ceremony.
Yeah, Sybok seems like the kind of guy who would go for a mass wedding. But the other possibility is that Sarek has just adopted many, many more children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like
Who
it.
knows how many weddings he attends every year.
These episodes are classic and they're enshrined in all of our memories. But if I could go back and just ADR Michael, Picard saying Michael during that montage, it would be complete.
Yep.
Yes.
I've said that multiple times. And as I was watching it this time, it's such an amazing performance. And, you're saying that it was mostly one take. I believe that. I think that, I don't know if you could get this performance in multiple takes, I feel like he threw himself into it. And
it's so raw.
Yeah.
It's almost difficult to watch. It feels like too much.
Yeah.
And I feel like more than one take, there would have been a temptation to pull back.
And it's such the strength of Patrick Stewart as an actor, and also of somebody like Mark Lenard, in that they can put on these goofy costumes and pajamas and be talking about mind melds and stuff, but just the certainty and the realness that they bring to it is just really what they contribute to the franchise. It's really their strength.
Yeah. I think you see with other space opera series, and I'm not going to name names, but I'm thinking of Babylon 5, where you give lesser actors that kind of work and it falls flat. And, not to criticize the actors of Babylon 5, most of them are brilliant, but every now and then you get someone who isn't quite strong enough, isn't quite brave enough to sell it the way Patrick Stewart does.
Yeah.
And, he's not one of a kind quite, but he's pretty rare.
I'll say it. Harry Kim. Every situation they put Garrett Wang in, I just don't believe it.
Yeah, I feel like that was a deliberate underwriting of the character. And, he was always being told, don't act too much. You don't want to draw attention away from the aliens.
Okay.
So,
well, bad advice.
Oh, yeah. I don't think he's untalented. I just don't think he ever got the opportunity to stretch his wings the way other actors did.
Well, fair enough. I apologize, Mr. Wang. Well, let's talk My Space Dad Can Beat Up Your Space Dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
Janeway. Sorry.
Space Mom, Janeway.
I don't know how to choose.
Janeway is definitely my favorite captain.
Sure.
I would say why, because Voyager's my show. Of all the shows. I fit into that crew best. I feel like Janeway would adopt me and bring me into her crazy crew of misfits, and I would fit in there. I would never make it on the Enterprise. And I probably wouldn't be in Starfleet on Deep Space Nine. I wouldn't be a part of Ops or anything. I'd be like a Dabu girl or something. I don't know. So I don't know if I would be a part of Adventures. But on Voyager, I'd be important because everybody on Voyager is important. And Janeway is really the one who, she created that idea that everyone is important. her collection of people that she brings in and makes sure that everybody is in their place. And even when she finds out that she's missed a few people, she goes out of her way to find them a place too.
Yeah. I always thought that Garrick must have had a Bajoran girl helping him hem pants or something. He couldn't be doing all that work by himself.
Yeah, I could definitely.
Well, we know Anika couldn't do that job.
Maybe if I had instruments, though.
Right. Future sewing instruments.
Future stuff. Yes. If I just had to program something, maybe it would be okay. But I could do his shop windows.
Well, now that we've reached the end of the show, you will both receive a commission and the rank of ensign in our Starfleet. What department on the ship do you work in?
Oh, I would be in command, but I wouldn't be serving on a starship. I would be the admin assistant to an admiral. I'd be the one going, we've just had a report from the Enterprise. I know they only launched yesterday, but Captain Picard says they've run into an omnipotent being that's putting humanity on trial.
Yeah.
Do you want to deal with that? And then I would die when my boss turns evil.
I guess I will go for a counselor, because that's where, if I got to choose what I wanted to do and be, I would choose counselor. So I'm going to go with that one.
Troy must also have other people on her staff that we never see.
Must.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is another episode where I sat and, we just see her for a moment speaking with Beverly in sort of a counseling type. She's her friend, but it was also it had this air.
They were in session.
We're in session, and and I was like, wow, can you imagine the week that Troy had with all this stuff going on, and then during and then after it probably stretched out into months just dealing with. Yeah, I was taken over by intense Vulcan emotions, and it screwed up my relationship.
Yeah. Well, Vulcan mind waves or no, if there's a huge brawl in the 10 forward, then there's going to be disciplinary actions. And I'm sure part of the disciplinary, the punishment is for you to have to go to counseling and stuff like that. So Troy's schedule is going to be full for months. Yeah.
Yeah. There has to be other counselors. One person can't manage 1,000 people.
Just to do onboarding and insurance.
Yeah. Or 999 people and data.
Yeah, right.
It's not like Data doesn't need counseling. Just saying.
He needs it more than anyone.
Exactly.
He's got a cat. He's fine.
Therapy cat. Yes.
Well, Ensigns Dane and Barr, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can, at EIST Pod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
Our podcast can be found at Antimatter Pod, all one word, .tumblr.com, or on Twitter, same username. And I can be found on Twitter at _LizBarr, that's LizBarr, and squiddishly.net, where I mostly blog about Voyager.
Awesome.
And I'm Manic Pixie Dane on Twitter and Pixie Dane most other places, other social medias. But if you go to manicpixiedust.com, then there's links to everywhere, as well as all of my various content.
Well, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
it's been
this
great.
has been wonderful. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. We are signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.